The second I saw her wedge her beige Lexus into my driveway like she owned the place, I knew this wasn't a neighborly visit. Rhonda Gatley, vice president of the Oak Ridge Springs HOA and self-proclaimed protector of neighborhood aesthetic, was stomping up my front steps like she was preparing for battle. I was halfway through re-staining the deck behind my house, earbuds in, beer sitting on the railing, just enjoying a quiet Saturday. That deck has been part of this house since 1985, back when my dad built it himself with a permit from the city that was still stapled inside the garage wall. It's older than half the people on this block. Rhonda didn't bother knocking. She just stood at the edge of my porch, arms crossed tight enough to crack ribs. "Mr. Jensen," she said with that customer service tone that sounds like she's daring you to breathe wrong. "That deck is in violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the HOA bylaws. Unapproved exterior structures must be removed immediately." I set down my brush. "It's been there for 39 years. "That doesn't matter," she snapped. "The HOA was established in 1998. Anything non-compliant must be brought into alignment." I almost laughed. "You think I'm tearing down a perfectly good deck because of a rule made 13 years after it was built?" Her eyes narrowed. "If you don't comply, we'll begin fining you $200 per day." And escalating. I didn't respond. I just walked past her into the garage, rummaged through the old filing cabinet buried beneath paint cans and fishing gear, and pulled out the yellowed building permit from 1985, signed and stamped by the city of Willow Creek. When I came back out and handed it to her, she looked at it like I'd just handed her a dead rat. "This predates your HOA," I said flatly, "which means your rules don't apply." "I've already verified that with the city permit office last year when I resealed it." "You should have submitted a request to the Architectural Review Committee," she hissed. "Regardless of age. Rhonda, I don't need permission to breathe on my own porch, let alone restain a deck that was legally built before your little club even existed." She turned red. "This isn't over. Expect a formal notice." And just like that, she spun around and stormed back to her Lexus. I watched her peel out down the block, tires screeching like she was in a soap opera. 2 days later, I got the first fine notice. Then another. Then a notice of non-compliance taped to my door like I was some squatter. That's when I knew this wasn't just Rhonda being Rhonda. This was war. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. The third notice came with a bright red header. Final warning. It was typed in all caps, printed on thick paper like they thought a heavier font could scare me into submission. I unfolded it at the kitchen table while my dog, Pepper, gnawed on a rope toy beside me. This one was different. It wasn't just a fine. It threatened a lien on my house. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. According to the document, the HOA had voted in a closed session to begin lien proceedings if I didn't remove the deck within 15 days. No mention of a hearing. No chance to appeal. Just a vague reference to emergency compliance enforcement. I walked straight out to the mailbox and pulled every envelope from the last week. Buried behind the usual junk mail and a coupon flyer was a plain white envelope from the HOA's attorney. Inside was a letter stating that, due to non-responsiveness, the HOA had exercised its right to enforce community standards unilaterally. They claimed my deck posed a liability risk to adjacent properties. That's when I knew something was off. My house backs up to a wooded lot. No neighbors behind me. No one even shares a fence line. There was no adjacent property to be at risk. I called my friend Alicia, a real estate paralegal who's seen HOAs try everything from complaining about doormats to attempting to seize land through obscure deed covenants. She showed up that afternoon with a binder thicker than the HOA rulebook and a Bluetooth headset still clipped to her ear. "They're bluffing," she said, flipping through the fine print in the HOA's Articles of Incorporation. "There's no clause that allows them to bypass a hearing unless the structure is an imminent safety threat." She pulled out her laptop and logged into the county property records portal. Within minutes, she had copies of my house's plat map, historical zoning approvals, and a scanned image of the 1985 inspection report showing the deck passed with no issues. We emailed it all to the city planning department, just to get their take. The response came the next morning. Structure is grandfathered, no violations on file. HOA does not have jurisdiction to override existing permits. I wasn't even surprised when Rhonda showed up again, this time with 2 other board members in tow, a guy named Brent, who always wore loafers without socks, and a woman named Carla who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. They didn't bother coming to the door. They stood in the middle of my yard, pointing at the deck and talking in hushed voices. I stepped outside and crossed my arms. "Something you want to say?" I asked. Brent cleared his throat like he was preparing to lecture a kindergartner. "We've received anonymous complaints regarding the structural integrity of this platform. It's called a deck," I said, "and it's structurally sound. I have a city inspection to prove it." Rhonda ignored me and turned to Carla. "Take pictures. We'll submit them with the enforcement report." "You're trespassing," I said. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my property or I'm calling the sheriff." Brent held up a laminated badge that looked like it came from a cereal box. "As HOA officers, we're permitted to inspect." "Nope," I cut him off. "Not without notice and not without consent. Read your own bylaws." They hesitated. I walked back inside and re-emerged with my phone already dialing. That did it. Rhonda dropped her arm, Carla lowered the phone, and Brent backed up like I'd pulled a weapon. By the time the sheriff's deputy arrived, they were long gone, but I handed him copies of the notices, the lawyer's letter, and the city's confirmation. He took one look at the paperwork and nodded. "This isn't the first complaint we've had about them," he said. "They like to play lawyer until they're talking to an actual one." That gave me an idea. I filed a formal complaint with the City Code Enforcement Office, citing harassment and false claims of safety violations. Alicia helped me draft it, attaching the documents and referencing specific municipal codes the HOA had violated by attempting to enforce a lien without due process. 3 days later, I got a call from a city inspector named Doug who wanted to come take a look for himself. He showed up in a city-issued truck, clipboard in hand, and spent all of 10 minutes walking the perimeter of the deck. "It's solid," he said. "No rot, no uneven boards, no exposed nails. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." "My dad," I said. "Back in '85, Doug gave a low whistle. They don't build them like this anymore." The next day, code enforcement slapped the HOA with a formal warning for attempting to enforce jurisdiction over a grandfathered structure. That should have ended it. But these people didn't know how to lose quietly. 1 week later, I came home from a night shift at the hospital to find yellow caution tape wrapped around the deck. A laminated sign hung from a nail on the railing. "Unsafe structure, do not use." They had faked an official city warning. I called Doug immediately. He drove out within 30 minutes. When he saw the sign, his face changed. "This isn't ours. We don't use this format." He peeled off the tape and took the sign down. There was no city seal, no inspector's initials. Just a generic font and a printed signature. "Code Enforcement Officer." Doug took photos and called it in. Within hours, a city investigator was assigned to the case. The forgery of a municipal notice is a misdemeanor under Willow Creek's local ordinances, and a criminal offense under state law if done with intent to intimidate. The city attorney subpoenaed HOA meeting records from the past 2 months. Alicia helped me file a request for public access to any decisions made by the board that affected my property. What we found was worse than I expected. The HOA had held a private vote without informing residents to allocate funds for legal contingency action against non-compliant homeowners. They'd earmarked over $12,000 to pursue enforcement against me and 2 other residents with legacy structures. We tracked down one of the others, a retired Army mechanic named Lou, who lived 3 streets over. They were threatening to fine him over a shed built in 1979. The other was a single mom being targeted for a greenhouse her late husband installed a decade before the HOA even existed. That's when we decided to go public. We organized a neighborhood meeting at the community center. Alicia created a presentation showing every legal overreach, every forged violation, and every dollar wasted on targeting people with pre-existing structures. Doug agreed to speak, confirming the deck was legal and safe. Lou brought photos of his original shed permit. The single mom, Vanessa, shared how she'd received threats of daily fines despite providing documentation. The room was packed. Even people who usually kept their heads down showed up. By the end of the meeting, the community voted to hold a special election to remove the current HOA board. Over 60 signatures were collected right there. 2 days later, Rhonda filed a cease and desist against me and Alicia, claiming defamation. Her lawyer must not have realized we'd already submitted every statement to the city and code enforcement, making them public record. The city investigator wrapped up their report a week later. They found sufficient evidence to refer the matter to the county prosecutor. Forging a government warning, misappropriating funds, and violating due process laws were all on the list. The county issued a formal summons to Rhonda and Brent. Carla, to her credit, had resigned quietly the day after the meeting. The deck, still standing, still solid, still legal. But now the HOA had bigger problems than faded wood stain. I didn't expect the local news van. It pulled up late one Thursday, just as I was hauling garbage cans back from the curb. The station logo was slapped across the door, and a young reporter hopped out with a cameraman in tow before I could even ask what was going on. She introduced herself, said she'd received a city press release referencing misconduct by the Oak Ridge Springs HOA and wanted to ask about the forged safety notice. I hadn't spoken to media before, but Alicia had warned this might happen. I agreed on one condition, that she also interview Vanessa and Lou. This wasn't just about my deck anymore. It was about everyone they tried to steamroll with threats and bogus enforcement. She nodded, took down their info, and asked if she could film the deck. I showed her the original permit, the old inspection report, and the city's written confirmation. The cameraman got a close-up of the laminated fake notice that Doug had returned to me after the city finished their investigation. It was now evidence in an active case, but I had scanned copies and he said that was fine. That night, the segment aired. It wasn't sensational, just the facts laid out cleanly. The reporter explained how the HOA had attempted to override a legal structure, forged a municipal warning, and misused funds to pursue enforcement against residents with grandfathered structures. Interviews with Doug and the city attorney punctuated the piece, along with comments from neighbors who'd started organizing a recall vote. The fallout came faster than I expected. By morning, the HOA's email server was flooded. Members were demanding a full accounting of every dollar spent over the past year, and someone had already created a neighborhood website tracking the board's decisions. Carla's resignation letter had been posted publicly, along with a time-stamped email chain showing that Rhonda had pushed for the private vote on legal action despite objections from 2 other board members who'd since gone silent. Then the subpoenas landed. According to Alicia, the county prosecutor's office had filed formal charges the night before the story aired. 2 counts of falsifying public documents, 1 count of unauthorized practice of law, and a charge of criminal misrepresentation of a municipal agency. Each count carried real penalties. Brent was also named, though only in relation to the financial misappropriation. Rhonda was the focus. The sheriff's department executed a search warrant at the HOA's office, a converted room inside the clubhouse, and removed the desktop computer, filing cabinets, and a black banker's box labeled Legal Reserve. Rumor had it they found correspondence between Rhonda and a private investigator she'd hired to gather leverage on homeowners resisting compliance. No one knew what that meant until Lou called me later that day. He'd just gotten off the phone with a detective. Apparently, the investigator had been paid with HOA funds to photograph residents' backyards and report anything non-conforming. He'd even trespassed onto private property. That turned the case from civil overreach into criminal surveillance. The county added another charge, conspiracy to violate privacy laws. The board fractured overnight. 3 board members called for an emergency vote to dissolve Rhonda's presidency. The problem was, Rhonda refused to step down. She claimed the charges were politically motivated and that she was being punished for preserving community standards. She issued a statement through her lawyer, insisting she had acted within the full scope of her authority. But the community had had enough. Within 72 hours, over 2/3 of homeowners signed the recall petition. The bylaw required only a 51% majority to trigger a special election. Alicia helped draft the ballot, and the city assigned an independent monitor to oversee the vote. It was scheduled for the following Saturday in the clubhouse gym. Meanwhile, the city council weighed in. Turns out, this wasn't the first time Oak Ridge Springs had made headlines. Back in the early 2000s, the board had tried to annex a vacant lot by declaring it a community buffer zone and charging the owner maintenance dues. The city had shut it down, but the HOA had quietly changed its charter afterward. That prompted the council to propose a new ordinance. Any HOA operating within city limits would be required to register major enforcement actions with the municipal code office. That meant no more secret meetings, no more backdoor votes, and no more rogue fines. The night before the election, someone placed flyers under every doormat in the neighborhood. No names, just a bold headline. The deck was just the beginning. Then, in smaller text, vote to take back our neighborhood. Saturday came fast. The gym buzzed with more people than I'd ever seen at a board function. Some brought lawn chairs. Others brought receipts literally. Vanessa held a folder with every letter she'd received from the HOA. Lou had a worn manila envelope with photos of his shed from when he built it with his father. They weren't there to argue. They were there to make sure this never happened again. By noon, the results were in. Rhonda and Brent were removed by a landslide. A temporary 3-person board was appointed to manage affairs until a formal election could be organized. One of them was a retired city planner. Another was a former school principal. The third, Alicia, who'd been nominated from the floor during the vote. The prosecutor's office announced that Rhonda's hearing would proceed in 2 months. She was released on bail but barred from participating in any HOA-related activity. Brent avoided criminal charges but was being sued civilly for misappropriation of funds, and just like that, the deck wasn't the battleground anymore. It was the symbol. A week later, the new board announced their first action. A full audit of HOA finances going back 5 years. Alicia also proposed a legacy structure protection clause to be added to the bylaws, shielding homes with pre-existing permitted structures from future targeting. It passed unanimously. One evening, as I sat on the deck with Pepper curled up beside me and the sun setting behind the trees, Vanessa walked over with a mason jar of sun tea. She handed it to me without a word and sat down on the steps. "I planted a row of tomatoes by the greenhouse yesterday," she said, looking out toward the woods. "First time I felt like I actually live here, not just stay here." Lou stopped by later with a 6-pack and a crooked grin. He said he'd finally repaired the door on his shed, and for the first time in years, he wasn't worried about someone measuring it with a clipboard. The deck never changed. It didn't need to, but the neighborhood did, and all it took was one forged sign to bring it all into the light. The new board wasted no time. Within a week, they'd suspended all ongoing enforcement actions and froze the HOA's discretionary legal fund. Alicia worked out of the old clubhouse office, now cleared of the clutter Rhonda had left behind. She'd found 3 shredded document bags tucked behind a locked cabinet, which the city investigator took into evidence. The county had already subpoenaed the bank statements, but something about the shredded paper felt deliberate. The forensic data team from the sheriff's office reconstructed what they could. One document, partially recovered, showed something that made Alicia's jaw tighten when she called me over to see it. It was a purchase receipt. Not for legal services, not for maintenance supplies. It was for surveillance gear motion-triggered cameras and a long-range microphone billed to the HOA's general account, purchased under Rhonda's name 4 months ago. Doug from the city code office confirmed the equipment hadn't been used for anything official, and it hadn't been authorized by any prior vote. The new board had 0 record of it. Alicia passed it to the county prosecutor, who added 2 more charges to the list: unlawful surveillance and misuse of HOA funds to violate resident privacy. That same week, Lou discovered a strange device behind his shed, half buried under pine needles. He brought it to Alicia, who identified it as one of the motion cameras from the purchase list. Vanessa found another, zip-tied under her back gutter. It was pointed directly at her greenhouse. The sheriff's office collected the devices and sent them to their digital forensics lab. The results came back 2 days later. The cameras had been active for weeks, capturing video and audio on private property without consent. Worse, the data had been accessed remotely. Someone had been watching. That gave the prosecutor grounds to escalate Rhonda's charges from misdemeanor to felony under the state's electronic surveillance laws. She was rearrested and booked without bail. Brent, once cornered with the new evidence, turned witness. His immunity deal required full cooperation, and he handed over copies of emails. Rhonda had sent him some with subject lines like "leverage on Lou" and "greenhouse lady find code issue." The trial date was expedited. The prosecutor wanted to shut it down before the next round of HOA elections, and the judge agreed, citing the public interest. Jury selection took less than a day. I was called to testify, not just about the forged violation, but about the pattern of intimidation. I brought the original permit, the city's letter, and even the photo of the fake caution sign Doug had taken. Vanessa and Lou testified after me. Each described the fear of being watched, the pressure to comply, and the fines that kept arriving even when they pushed back. The jury didn't need long. They returned a verdict in under 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Rhonda was sentenced to 5 years probation, banned from serving on any residential board, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA. She was also required to attend mandatory ethics and legal compliance training, which the judge called the absolute minimum for someone who weaponized authority. Brent, having cooperated fully, received a suspended sentence and was ordered to complete community service, ironically, within the same neighborhood he once helped terrorize. After the trial, the new board held a community forum, this time with a very different tone. Folding chairs filled the clubhouse in neat rows, and a whiteboard listed every reform proposal being considered. One by one, residents stood to speak, not to complain, but to suggest. A retired firefighter proposed a clause requiring third-party verification before any property violation was issued. A teacher recommended standardized communication templates so no more forged signs could slip through. Lou, never much for public speaking, stood and said, "Let's make sure this place is run by neighbors, not hall monitors." The applause was quiet but steady. Alicia unveiled the revised bylaws draft. It included the Legacy Structure Protection Clause, a cap on discretionary spending without community vote, and a new transparency requirement. All enforcement actions had to be logged publicly within 72 hours. No exceptions. The vote passed unanimously. Weeks passed. The caution tape was long gone, and the clubhouse had a fresh coat of paint. The new board replaced the old filing cabinets with digital systems and hired a part-time administrator to manage records. For the first time, the HOA operated like a real organization, not a power trip in beige siding. One afternoon, I was sitting on the deck, sorting through old tools when Lou stopped by. He dropped a small wooden plaque onto the table. It was hand-carved, the letters burned into the grain. Legacy Deck, it read. Built 1985, stood 2024, I raised an eyebrow. Couple of us chipped in, he said. We figured since it started here, it ought to be remembered here. I mounted it under the railing that evening, not flashy, not loud, just there like the deck itself. A few days later, Vanessa invited everyone over for a garden party. Her kids helped set up picnic tables between the greenhouse and the raised beds. There was lemonade, grilled burgers, and a playlist of old rock and Motown that drifted through the air like summer. People who'd never spoken more than a wave before were trading stories, passing plates, laughing like neighbors again. Doug showed up late in his city polo and a pair of worn boots. He stayed until dark, talking with residents about how to better coordinate with the city going forward. No lectures. Just listening. As the last of the fireflies blinked above the tree line, Vanessa tapped her glass and raised it. To the people who stood their ground, she said, and to the deck that didn't move. Everyone lifted their cups. It wasn't about the wood, the stain, or the railing. It was about drawing the line, about showing that rules don't outrank rights and that fear doesn't get to wear a name tag and call itself order. Rhonda's story faded into the background, just another cautionary tale, but the neighborhood stayed different, more aware, less afraid. When the next HOA election came around, more people ran than seats available. Not to control, but to protect. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my dad's old deck kept doing what it always had, quietly holding up the weight of things that mattered.